In the long shadow of the Cold War, there are stories of machines built not merely for speed, not only for combat, but for an age terrified of its own destructive power. Some of these machines became legends. Others were forgotten prototypes left behind despite extraordinary ambition. Today we uncover one of the most astonishing examples of the latter, a jet fighter so strong, so heavily engineered, and so ahead of its time that it survived nuclear shockwaves, yet never entered service. Before we begin this journey through forgotten engineering, brilliance, atomic fire, and the unreachable dreams of early jet aviation, I invite you to support the channel WW2 Untold Battles so that more extraordinary but overlooked stories like this can be brought to life. Your support helps revive the hidden chapters of aviation history. Now let us enter the world of the Lockheed XF-90, a machine built like no other fighter that ever flew. From its first lines on the drafting tables of Lockheed's Skunk Works, the XF-90 was treated not as a conventional aircraft, but as an armored spear designed for a world preparing for unimaginable destruction. During the closing days of the Second World War and the opening years of the Cold War, engineers did not yet understand how supersonic speed would stress metal. Shockwaves, heat vibration, and pressures beyond anything seen before raised a daunting list of unknowns. Instead of guessing, Skunk Works applied brute force engineering. They constructed the strongest airframe ever attempted for a fighter, combining thick plates of 75S aluminum wrapped around a solid steel spine. The result was a fuselage so dense and rigid that it resembled armor more than aerodynamics. Every rib bracket and joint was overbuilt. Every ounce of structure was designed to endure shocks that engineers could barely describe mathematically. It was intended to be at least 50% stronger than any warplane in existence. It needed to be, for the jet was meant to escort the mighty Convair B-36 Peacemaker, an aircraft larger, heavier, and longer range than anything humanity had ever launched into the sky. The escort fighter had to stay with it across oceans, dive past the speed of sound, and deliver nuclear fire if required. This was not merely a fighter. It was a guardian for a bomber designed to strike from one continent to another. In 1952, during a series of atomic tests in Nevada, the XF-90 stood on the desert floor anchored to the sand. A blinding sphere of white light erupted on the horizon. The flash reflected across the polished aluminum skin. The shock wave struck moments later, slamming into the airframe with the force of thousands of tons of explosive energy. The landing gear shook like gelatin. The tail vibrated violently, yet the fighter remained upright. Before reaching that dramatic trial, however, the XF-90's story began in a world racing toward jet power. While Europe had sprinted ahead with pioneering jet aircraft, the United States, consumed by the global demands of the Second World War, had focused on producing vast numbers of proven piston fighters. This strategy had won the war, but it left the nation behind in the early jet contest. Foreign jet programs, such as Germany's Messerschmitt 262 and Britain's Gloster Meteor, had shown clear advantages of jet propulsion: higher speeds, improved altitude performance, and deadly firepower concentrated into compact airframes. Before these aircraft proved themselves in 1944, jets had been considered curiosities, not the future of aerial combat. Once they did prove themselves, the world changed almost overnight. Transitioning to jets, however, required far more than new engines. It required the reinvention of the entire aviation ecosystem, new fuels capable of withstanding extreme temperatures, new maintenance facilities designed around turbines rather than cylinders, and new pilot training to handle unprecedented speeds. Wartime priorities made such transitions difficult. Yet even during those years, Lockheed's Skunk Works had been quietly dreaming ahead. The L-133, a radical 1939 design with forward canards and a blended fuselage, hinted at a future that the world was not quite ready to build. Though the concept never reached full production, it proved that Lockheed's engineers were already thinking beyond conventional flight envelopes. When the United States Air Force became an independent service in 1947, it faced a strategic challenge. Either it had to accelerate its jet development or risk being overtaken in the early Cold War skies. Strategic Air Command, responsible for the nation's nuclear strike capabilities, placed its faith in massive bombers capable of reaching targets across the globe without escorts. But this doctrine soon collided with reality. Without fighter protection, even the immense B-36 could be vulnerable to faster enemy interceptors. Thus, the requirement for a long-range jet escort emerged, and that requirement was almost impossible. To escort the B-36, a fighter needed to match its astonishing performance: a wingspan of 230 feet, a maximum takeoff weight above 410,000 pounds, and an unrefueled combat radius nearing 3,900 miles. A fighter that could accompany such a behemoth required unprecedented endurance, efficiency, and speed. To meet the challenge, American aircraft companies proposed their boldest ideas. North American Aviation offered the F-86 Sabre, which would eventually achieve fame in Korea. Its 35-degree swept wings, inspired by wartime German aerodynamics research, gave it excellent maneuverability and high-speed stability. The General Electric J-47 turbojet pushed it toward nearly 690 miles per hour, with impressive climb performance. It would earn a legendary reputation against the Soviet-designed MiG-15. Republic Aviation answered with the F-91 Thunderceptor, a radical fighter with reverse-tapered wings wider at the tips than the roots and a hybrid propulsion system combining turbojet power with a rocket booster for short bursts of acceleration. The Thunderceptor even broke the sound barrier in level flight, suggesting that the future of supersonic combat was rapidly approaching. Lockheed's solution was the XP-90, which would become the XF-90. It presented a sleek, elongated fuselage and swept wings intended to stabilize the aircraft during extremely long missions. It promised endurance and deep penetration capability. In June 1946, Lockheed received a contract for 2 prototypes. Under the guidance of engineer Willis Hawkins and Skunk Works visionary Kelly Johnson, the team built the jet with the same obsessive precision that had shaped the P-38 Lightning and would later produce the U-2 and SR-71. Skunk Works excelled because it operated as a compact and independent team, insulated from the slow bureaucracy of larger defense contractors. Its engineers were encouraged to innovate rapidly, test aggressively, and break conventional assumptions. The XF-90 embodied this ethos. The jet stretched 56 feet and 2 inches from nose to tail, with a wingspan of 40 feet and a height of 15 feet and 9 inches. It retained the intake layout of the P-80 Shooting Star, but added swept wings at 35 degrees sharp stabilizers that could be adjusted during flight and a pointed fuselage for optimal supersonic dives. The cockpit was pressurized, the canopy provided clear visibility, and an ejection seat protected the pilot. Armament consisted of 6 20mm cannons, heavy firepower for a fighter intended to protect intercontinental bombers. But the real challenge was range. To stay with the B-36, the XF-90 needed to carry enormous fuel loads. Wingtip tanks increased its total capacity to 1,665 gallons, an extraordinary amount for a fighter. The aircraft incorporated the first American swept-wing design with afterburners, fully adjustable stabilizers, and standard wingtip tanks. In theory, it was a leap ahead of its time. In practice, it was a paradox: advanced aerodynamics attached to a weight nearly impossible to push through the sky. The XF-90 weighed 27,200 pounds, almost 80% heavier than the F-86 Sabre, and its twin Westinghouse J-34 engines produced only 6,200 pounds of thrust combined. The result was inevitable. Pilots soon discovered that the aircraft was sleek in appearance but heavy in motion. Every maneuver demanded anticipation. Every climb required deliberate planning. At high altitude, the engines gasped for air. Sustained speed suffered. Energy bled away quickly. The jet resisted abrupt changes and punished overcorrections. Yet the XF-90 held a secret strength: it was nearly indestructible. On June 3, 1949, test pilot Tony Levere pushed the prototype into the sky for the first time. The airframe trembled under full power, feeling dense and deliberate. The plane rose not with the eager leap of a fighter, but with the slow determination of a heavy spear carving through air. Maneuvering revealed the same pattern. Precision was required. Force alone would not suffice. But refinement continued. Engineers tweaked ailerons, modified elevators, and improved instrumentation. Then came the dive tests at Edwards Air Force Base on May 17, 1950. Levere tipped the nose downward and accelerated. The angular fighter plunged faster and faster. Observers felt a thunderous boom ripple across the desert. Many believed the aircraft had exploded, yet the wings held. The fuselage remained intact. And at the bottom of that plunge, the instruments revealed the impossible. The XF-90 had reached Mach 1.12, breaking the sound barrier. It would break it again on later dives, repeatedly proving the strength of its structure even if its engines lagged behind. In early 1952, the second prototype was sent to the Nevada Proving Ground for nuclear testing. Engineers wanted to know, could a jet survive atomic shock waves? The first blast erupted. The skin flexed. The tail shook. But the XF-90 remained upright. 2 more detonations followed. Though badly damaged, the airframe did not disintegrate. The tests revealed the aircraft's paradox tough beyond expectation, yet limited by the engines available in its era. The nuclear trials confirmed what pilots and engineers already suspected: the XF-90 possessed extraordinary structural resilience, but its performance limitations came from a different source. The problem was not the airframe. The problem was the engines. From the very beginning, the entire aircraft had been designed around power plants that did not exist yet. Skunk Works engineers assumed that by the time their long-range escort fighter was ready, American jet propulsion would catch up, delivering engines capable of carrying heavy loads across continents. They believed that thrust would soon surge ahead of aerodynamic demands. But reality worked in reverse. Aerodynamics advanced rapidly. Jet engines advanced slowly. The XF-90 prototypes flew with General Electric J-34 engines, lightweight compact turbines intended for smaller aircraft. These engines were simply not designed to push a steel-reinforced fuselage weighing more than 27,000 pounds. Even with afterburners, the thrust-to-weight ratio never approached what escort missions required. Afterburning turbojets, still in their infancy, burned fuel at rates that made long-range operations impossible. Supersonic flight was achievable only in steep dives. Sustained high-speed cruising essential for escort duty remained beyond reach. The one engine that might have changed everything, the General Electric J-47, was already committed to proven aircraft, such as the B-47 Stratojet, and to the new generation of Navy carrier fighters. With production stretched thin, no military branch was willing to assign precious engines to an experimental heavyweight whose performance was still uncertain. Thus, in 1950, as F-86, Sabres clashed with MiG-15s over the Yalu River in the first major jet versus jet battles in history. Lockheed's futuristic escort fighter sat grounded in California, unable to compete. Even if better engines had been installed, the XF-90's immense mass meant that additional thrust could improve speed but not erase the fundamental limitations of weight. The Air Force needed a fighter that could climb quickly, accelerate decisively, and maneuver sharply. The XF-90, despite its aerodynamic beauty, struggled in all 3 areas. By contrast, the F-86 Sabre offered agility and reliability in a package that was simple to maintain and easy to deploy. With a powerful J-47 engine, 35-degree swept wings, and a stable gun platform, the Sabre became the most practical choice. It climbed more than 9,000 feet per minute, reached altitudes near 49,000 feet, and extended its combat radius beyond 1,000 miles, with drop tanks sufficient for most tactical engagements. Over Korea, dozens of F-86s tangled with MiG-15s in swirling 3-dimensional battles. Their precise controls and stable handling allowed American pilots to counter enemy attacks at high altitude, outmaneuvering adversaries with bursts of 50-caliber fire. The Sabre's combat success only highlighted the XF-90's shortcomings. Where the Sabre turned gracefully, the XF-90 resisted. Where the Sabre accelerated, the XF-90 hesitated. Where the Sabre won dogfights, the XF-90 could barely maintain energy. Yet even the Sabre could not fulfill the B-36 escort mission. Its range, even stretched by external tanks, fell far short of the thousands of miles required. The escort concept itself, though bold, was beginning to appear flawed, and new experimental fighters introduced additional complications. Republic's XF-91 Thunderceptor, for instance, offered astounding bursts of acceleration thanks to its rocket-boosted propulsion system. It briefly exceeded 700 miles per hour and climbed at rates that no contemporary jet could match. But this radical performance came at a steep price: fuel consumption so extreme that the aircraft's endurance dropped to mere minutes of effective combat time. Its mechanical complexity made maintenance and deployment unrealistic. Thus, neither conventional nor experimental jets could reconcile the holy trinity required for escort fighters: high speed, long range, and manageable fuel burn. By the early 1950s, it became clear that no aircraft, American or otherwise, could combine the XF-90's heavy structure with the speed and endurance needed to accompany a strategic bomber across continents. The Air Force acknowledged the hard truth. It abandoned the search for a long-range escort fighter altogether. Instead, strategy shifted. Rather than protecting bombers with fighters, the United States would empower the bombers themselves. Advances in long-range capability, larger payloads, and eventually aerial refueling made escorts unnecessary. The B-36, followed by the B-47 Stratojet and later the B-52 Stratofortress, could strike faraway targets without relying on fighters. This doctrinal shift left the XF-90 without a mission, yet the aircraft did not vanish quietly. While it never reached operational service, it captured the public imagination in ways that few prototypes ever had. Its elongated shape, swept wings, and twin-jet configuration made it a symbol of American aerospace ambition. Publicity campaigns depicted the fighter slicing through clouds, a vision of a sleek, jet-powered future. Car manufacturers borrowed its aesthetics, incorporating swept tail fins and twin exhaust designs into automobiles of the early 1950s. Posters, magazine covers, and promotional films presented the XF-90 as a herald of the jet age. Its cultural presence even entered comic books. In September 1953, the fighter appeared on the cover of Black Hawk, the adventure series featuring heroic pilots defending the free world. The artists portrayed Black Hawk and his squadron flying F-90Bs, transforming the prototype into an icon of technological optimism amid the looming threat of nuclear conflict. But in the real world, optimism could not overcome physics. In 1951, after years of testing and evaluation, the United States Air Force officially cancelled the XF-90 program. The reasons were practical, excessive fuel consumption, weak operational performance at combat altitude, and maintenance requirements that exceeded what a production fighter could sustain. Even so, the aircraft continued contributing to aviation science. Flight data from the prototypes became invaluable. Engineers learned from the XF-90's supersonic dives, measuring the behavior of heavy airframes under extreme loads. They studied its control surfaces, examined structural flex patterns, and refined aerodynamic equations for future fighters. The first prototype was eventually transferred to the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics for destructive static testing. Engineers bolted the airframe to massive hydraulic rigs and pushed it to its structural breaking points. Metal groaned, panels twisted, sections of the fuselage buckled and tore away. The aircraft that had survived nuclear shockwaves finally succumbed to the relentless force of controlled laboratory pressure. The second prototype, the one that had endured nuclear blasts in the desert, fared better. Though damaged beyond repair, it survived intact long enough to be decontaminated years later. After spending decades exposed to the elements, it was rescued, restored, and eventually delivered to the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. There it stands today, a testament to the boldness of Lockheed's ambitions and the hard lessons of early jet propulsion. For Skunk Works, the XF-90 was not a failure. Far from it. It proved that their small, elite team could rapidly design, build, and evaluate an experimental fighter under intense time pressure. The project introduced features that would become standard: afterburners, wingtip tanks, and innovative armament placement for stability at high speed. The XF-90 also generated a wealth of empirical data on supersonic flight structural stress, fuel behavior at extreme speeds, and the limits of heavy airframes. This knowledge shaped not only later Lockheed projects but the broader philosophy of American fighter design. Engineers began to emphasize the delicate balance between thrust and weight, prioritizing efficiency over brute structural mass. All of these lessons converged in a single aircraft, the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. With its needle-like fuselage, razor-thin wings, blistering speed, and uncompromising focus on performance without excess weight, the starfighter embodied the evolutionary path that began with the XF-90's experiments. In the end, the XF-90 remains one of aviation history's most fascinating paradoxes, a fighter too strong for its engines, too heavy for its mission, and too ahead of its time to serve the world that built it. Yet its legacy shaped the jets that followed and contributed to our understanding of what flight through the sound barrier demands of both machine and pilot. This story, like so many hidden chapters of aviation history, reminds us that even abandoned prototypes can leave deep and lasting imprints on technology, strategy, and culture. Behind every successful aircraft lies a lineage of failures, experiments, and daring attempts that pushed the boundaries of imagination. If you found this exploration into the forgotten brilliance of the XF-90 inspiring, informative, or eye-opening, I invite you once more to support the channel www.2 Untold Battles, so that more untold stories of innovation, sacrifice, and ambition can be brought back to life. Your support ensures these remarkable but overlooked machines and the people who created them are never forgotten.